In the early 1990s, plans were made to overhaul an icon, when after 20 years of production, the time had come to revitalize the legendary Range Rover, the world's first luxury SUV, and a car that had become the gruff but sophisticated regal carriage for average families, the established gentry, and even heads of state. The result was the P38, a complete overhaul of the original Range Rover formula, and a car aimed squarely at bringing the concept of the SUV out of the mud and putting it on Knightsbridge and Sunset Boulevard, though the P38 would only play a minor role in this capacity, as due to a plethora of build quality faults and reliability concerns, a replacement for this car was being considered within only a year of its launch. To understand the story of the P38, one must go back to its predecessor, the original Range Rover of 1969, which was launched by British Leyland as a two-door sports utility vehicle in a vein similar to pioneering American equivalents such as the Jeep Wagoneer and the International Harvester Scout, combining the comfort and road manners of a regular car with the off-road capabilities of a dedicated utility vehicle. Initially, the Range Rover was not a luxury car, being built more for the purposes of providing an SUV with added features and comforts than the purpose-built Land Rover Series 3. But following British Leyland's bankruptcy and subsequent reorganisation under Chairman Sir Michael Edwards, he saw that the Range Rover model had incredible amounts of potential. Thus, the car was relaunched in 1981, both with the option of 4 doors and with a more luxurious variant known as the Vogue, taking its name from the American monthly fashion and lifestyle magazine, which provided a myriad of opulent features in order to try and endear the car to a more exclusive clientele. Throughout the 1980s, and once the Range Rover had been fully launched as its own model in the United States during 1987, the car continued its gradual climb up the ladder of luxury motoring, the Vogue editions being a phenomenal success for the Land Rover company as they sold well among wealthy buyers all across the globe. With the demands for increased elements of luxury and plushness within the model range, this would allow British Leyland's successor, the Rover Group, to keep the prices relatively high, but not on the same level as ultra-exclusive models like the Rolls-Royce Silver Spirit, the mark remaining within the reach of regular buyers and thus assuring a wide customer base. In 1989, the Range Rover's place as the flagship of the Land Rover hierarchy was firmly established by the launch of the Land Rover Discovery, a car which essentially filled the role of the original Range Rovers of the 1970s by combining car-like comfort and ride with unbeatable off-road performance, the Range Rover being accordingly pushed higher up the market in order to make it the only luxury SUV on sale at the time. The main problem with the original Range Rover, though, was its styling, the car having remained largely unchanged externally since its launch in 1969, aside from the addition of the 4-door variant in 1981. And while the looks of the Range Rover were indeed a perfect mixture of utility and aesthetics, by 1988 it was clear something far more contemporary was needed to ensure the model's place on the market. Thus, early work began during that year to completely overhaul the Range Rover's engineering and styling, although it wouldn't be until 1990 that, with a budget of £300 million, Land Rover would officially greenlight the scheme under Project 38A. With a launch date of late 1994 now firmly set, developing the P38's mechanics and technical aspects wasn't an overwhelmingly strenuous task, the sturdy underpinnings of the original Range Rover lending themselves nicely to the updated model, while for each individual innovation developed for the new car, these would be introduced on the original Range Rover to measure customer feedback. The biggest hurdle to overcome, though, was the styling, the main appeal of the Range Rover being its utilitarian but eye-pleasing lines, which had allowed it to become the first ever car to be exhibited in the Musée du Louvre in Paris, and therefore Land Rover worked hard to ensure that the aesthetics of the new P38 were updated for the car market of the 1990s, but remained familiar to the 1969 original. George Thompson, Land Rover's styling director, stepped up to the challenge upon the project's launch, while in order to give a wide variety of options as to where the styling of the car would go, Land Rover undertook a design competition at their Solihull factory, inviting among the world's most famous car styling houses to develop the new model. With the Italian styling houses Pininfarina, Italdesign and Bertoni, alongside British designers John Heffernan and Ken Greenlee, as well as Land Rover's internal styling team, being invited to submit proposals, the two finalists would be Bertoni and Land Rover itself, the latter of whom had utilised 5 then unreleased Range Rover LSC long-wheelbase chassis designs on which to develop the car's cosmetics. Each of the finalist proposals were brought forward to full-size clay models and underwent market research in customer clinics to determine which was more preferable to the potential buyer, the more conservative in-house design being favoured over Bertoni's, which was considered to be not Range Rover enough. Therefore, Land Rover's proposal, codenamed Pegasus, was to be taken forward, with the more iconic facets of the original Range Rover body design being carried over. These cues identified as a low waistline, straight flank feature lines, dark window surrounds, a floating roof, and castle ridges on the front corners of the clamshell bonnet. The general idea was to present a car which, from a distance, maintained the overall iconic shape of the original Range Rover, but was in and of itself a different car, while other changes included the removal of the earlier round headlights in favour of rectangular block light clusters with orange indicator lamps at the side. Meanwhile, wind tunnel tests illustrated that minor alterations to the rake of the grille and the addition of small strakes to the rear pillars allowed it to gain a drag coefficient of 0.38 against the original 0.45, with safety for the occupants being of the highest priority, as the front and offset crash impact resistance were improved through further chassis reinforcement. The fuel tank was relocated to beneath the rear seat to make it less exposed, and side impact bars were added to all the doors, with the car subsequently being christened the codename P38, which was an amalgamation of the styling code Pegasus and the original 38A number. The car was to be introduced with 2 brand new variants of the classic Rover V8 engine of the 1960s, including the 4-litre and the range-topping 4.6-litre, the former developing 190 horsepower and the latter 225 horsepower, although the older Italian VM diesel power unit of the Range Rover Turbo D, which produced 119 horsepower, was considered ill-suited for such a large car. Thus, Program Director John Hall approached 6 different manufacturers in order to provide a suitable power plant, eventually settling on BMW's M51 2.5-litre straight-six turbo diesel engine from the 3rd generation 3 Series and 5 Series saloon cars. Internally, in order to replace the aging look of the original Range Rover's somewhat utilitarian interior, with even the luxury Vogue models including the large agricultural steering wheel and flat-fronted dashboard, the design team behind the P38 were allowed a certain degree of scope to refresh the 1970s-era cabin architecture with something more akin to that of a Mercedes S-Class. This move would bring the interior quality up to a standard on par with its Germanic rivals, although providing every feature and trinket available on regular luxury saloons was unfortunately unobtainable due to the constraints of the budget, while in many cases, parts were sourced from the Rover 800 Executive Saloon to save costs. Launched on September 29, 1994, the Range Rover P38 was the first brand new product to be launched following the takeover of the Ailing Rover Group by BMW on January 31st of the same year, with the German car group highlighting that the release of this striking new Range Rover model was merely the beginning of their wider aspirations, despite the fact that BMW had little to no involvement in the overall development of the model. Initial reviews were complimentary about the new car, but did not lather it with the same overall acclaim that the original Range Rover had achieved consistently, the main criticism being that it was simply a thorough reworking of a familiar formula, which didn't bring anything comprehensively new to the table. Despite the lukewarm reception, though, the P38 was a popular car among customers, with 2,669 sold during the final 3 months of 1994, the new Range Rover appealing on multiple levels, with the low-end 2.5-litre quickly becoming a favourite among middle-class families on the school run, providing a perfect mixture of car-like comfort and road manners, but with an increased ride height and a sturdy build for improved safety. The 4-litre and 4.6-litre Vogue editions, meanwhile, were lapped up by both existing and new affluent customers, who appreciated its more car-like interior and superior refinement over the previous Range Rover, which was now marketed as the Range Rover Classic and continued to be sold alongside the P38 until 1995 in order to cover for delays in preparing the new car for the left-hand drive market. In 1995, the car saw its launch in the United States and sold 4,428 examples during its first year alongside 2,457 Range Rover Classics, while from the start of production, the P38 could also undergo aftermarket conversion in partnership with Overfinch Limited, a Leeds-based engineering firm, which, for an additional sum, would replace the Range Rover's original power plant with a 5-litre and 5.7-litre Chevrolet small block V8 engine from the Corvette. Overfinch had undertaken conversions of Range Rovers since 1979 and would also provide internal trim updates as per customer specification, including bird walnut trim, sports seats, cruise control, DVD satellite navigation systems, and more. The Range Rover P38 was also, at one point, the most popular motorway patrol car in the UK, being introduced by police constabularies and the governing body of the British Strategic Road Network, the Highways Agency, who had been consulted as early as 1990 by Land Rover and allowed early previews of a dedicated police model. With the car facing significant competition on the 4x4 market for a dedicated motorway patrol vehicle against the likes of the Nissan Patrol and the Toyota Land Cruiser, the P38 would also battle it out with its own stablemate, the Land Rover Discovery, for domination of this vital work patrolling the public highway network. With 6 police demonstrators launched in the autumn of 1994, the standard police spec Range Rover P38 was with the 4-litre V8 engine, a manual gearbox and base specification, and following a successful tour of the nation's police forces, the first Range Rover P38A was delivered to Greater Manchester Police in February 1996. This was followed later that year by their entry into service with the Essex Police, City of London Police, Lancashire Constabulary, Cheshire Constabulary, Warwickshire Constabulary, and Durham Constabulary, the Range Rover's appeal coming through the superb performance of the Rover V8, its spacious interior, comfort, and off-road capabilities. However, things weren't entirely perfect with the new Range Rover, as with the fullness of time several major problems quickly appeared, chief among which were severe issues relating to the 4-litre and 4.6-litre Rover V8 power units, which were especially prone to problems of blown head gaskets and dropped liners, which rendered the engine block porous and thus susceptible to cracking, requiring a costly engine-out rebuild. The cause of this issue was primarily due to the quality of the engine build and the bore, while the air suspension system adopted by the P38 was also a major issue for customers, as this innovative piece of equipment was able to vary the height of the car so as to improve on-road dynamics, hunkering down at speed and raising for off-road use to increase axle articulation. The air suspension system had originally been introduced on the 1993 Range Rover Classic, but was prone to leaks and cracked pipes that resulted in a loss of pressure, rendering the car almost undrivable, while due to problems with the programming of the onboard computer, the car would be stuck in an incorrect ride height for the driving environment. The main problem with the P38 was indeed the quality of its finish, often topping consumer satisfaction lists for the most unreliable car on sale at the time, its problems ranging from mechanical issues with the engine and suspension to complete electrical failures, loosely fitted trim, software issues that would refuse to either lock or unlock the doors, and other major faults that led to expensive warranty claims. This isn't to say the Range Rover P38 didn't sell, as while the V8 versions had the lion's share of the problems, combined with their incredible thirst of 14 miles per gallon, the diesel-powered BMW 2.5-litre version with the straight-six engine was far more popular, achieving a much more reasonable 26 miles per gallon while avoiding the head gasket concerns, though the plastic impellers in the water pump had a tendency to break up, thus causing the engine to overheat. While there were indeed many problems with the quality of the cars, their continued sales success gave BMW the incentive to begin plans for a mid-life facelift as early as 1995, updating the styling, while also replacing the troublesome Rover V8 engines with a succession of equivalent BMW power units, including 3.5 and 4.4-litre variants of BMW's upcoming S62 V8 petrol engine, which was to be fitted to the M5 and later the Z8. However, in September 1995, former BMW development executive Wolfgang Reitzler was appointed chairman of Rover Group and immediately saw the potential the Range Rover possessed as the most exclusive luxury SUV on the market, his aspiration being to create ultra-opulent versions of the car, which would be marketed to a celebrity clientele and would host BMW's 5.4-litre M73 V12 from the 7 Series luxury saloon. This car would be put on sale at a minimum of £100,000, while various styling upgrades were adopted, including an integrated light cluster and grille and reworked rear styling, though early issues would emerge regarding the M73 V12 power unit, as this was 6 inches longer than the Rover V8 and thus would require an increased front overhang that would spoil the car's off-road ability. There were other problems too, with Reitzler being disappointed with the quality of the machine, famously pulling the interior of the prototype to pieces while sat inside it at the Rover Group's test centre in Gaydon, Warwickshire, creating a list of 70 major issues with the interior of the car alone that needed rectifying. Eventually, his list of external and mechanical problems in need of amendment came to such a length that it was instead decided that a comprehensive reworking of the Range Rover was required, leading to the start of Project L322. L322 would essentially be a scratch-built Range Rover, maintaining a similar style and profile to the P38, but with all of the many faults with the previous model amended to create a luxury SUV worthy of its place at the top of the motoring market alongside the likes of the Mercedes S-Class and the Rolls-Royce Silver Seraph. The start of development for the L322 came in 1996, meaning that the P38's proposed extensive facelift was altered to be but a mild cosmetic refresh, replacing the original orange indicators with clear ones, incorporating mild exterior improvements, and utilizing the upgraded Thor version of the Rover V8, which ironed out many of the pervasive problems. This isn't to say that BMW had completely given up on the P38, as Reitzler continued to drive the Range Rover marque upward so it would appeal to a more affluent customer base, starting at the 1995 London Motor Show, wherein the Land Rover Autobiography Programme, a personalisation programme introduced in 1993 for the Range Rover Classic, was applied to the P38. This would allow customers to select a myriad of bespoke luxury features for the range-topping 4-litre SE automatics and 4.6-litre HSC. And while the external Range Rover body remained unchanged, though customers had no limit as to the number of paint schemes available, it was the interior where the Autobiography editions truly made their mark. Features on the Autobiography included leather seats, in a choice of modern or traditional facings being offered as standard, alongside additional wood trimmings custom-made for the driver's pleasure, the lengthy and complicated task of developing these many internal trinkets being outsourced to the specialist services of a number of external contractors. Completion of the assembly would then be followed by the Autobiography P38's transfer to the Land Rover Special Vehicles Department, or LRSV, where each of its removable body panels, such as the doors, front wings, bonnet and tailgate sections, were carefully removed in order for them to undergo a hand-finished repaint in the non-standard colour specified by the customer. In 1996, the Autobiography edition was taken a step further through the inclusion of cutting-edge ICE or in-car entertainment, allowing, for the first time, the provision of a television and video system with VHS player. This system comprising a TV screen in the back of each front seat head restraint and infrared remote headphones to listen through. From the spring of 1997, a Philips Caron satellite navigation system was also made available, which took the signal from 3 satellites that determined the car's real-time location and compared it to the position of the car on a digital road map that was stored on a CD-ROM located in a specially installed player in the boot, this system being initially available for London, the West Midlands and Manchester. As essentially a proxy for the ultra-luxury Range Rover envisaged by Reitzler, the exclusivity of these cars was reflected in their options, with prices for the interior trim options including £411.25 for lamb's wool carpet over rugs, £763.75 for tinted security glass, £934.12 for the luxury trim package, £1,116.25 for the rear seat picnic tables, £3,225.37 for special leather seats with perforations, and £3,231.25 for the deluxe wood veneer interior, while the TV and video system was listed as having a recommended retail price of £9,341.25. In September 1998, the flagship Vogue SE trim package was made available as a limited production option upgrade for the regular 4.6 HSE, with 220 examples of this ultra-luxury car being sold at a cost of £53,750, or £100,600 in 2024. The Vogue SE, featuring many elements of the Autobiography programme as standard, and in spite of its incredible price tag, found a home with many of the world's most affluent drivers. This inspired Land Rover to follow through in December 1998 with a second edition Vogue SE, which was available to just 100 customers, this time with colour coding influence that linked the seat edge piping with the light stone main interior colour, the second variant Vogue SE going on sale at £54,495 or £102,000 in 2024, followed by another limited run of the Vogue SC model in the summer of 1999, amounting to 150 units. The range-topping Vogue SE would continue to be introduced throughout 1999 and 2000 for limited production runs, undergoing a rolling update plan in order to keep it in line with the latest motoring technology and trends, the final Vogue SE for the Range Rover P38 being undertaken in September 2001, of which 300 examples were built. The standard version of this model would enter sales at a price of £53,995, while the inclusion of an optional TV and DVD system cost £57,995. All of these limited production Vogue SE models selling out, and thus being a clear indication to Land Rover that the Range Rover had indeed reached its goal of raising the bar of luxury SUVs into the realms of ultra-exclusivity. However, the most luxurious variant of the Range Rover P38 wasn't even a Range Rover, as in 1994, at the very start of the P38's launch, the Sultan of Brunei, Hassan al-Bolkiah, placed an order with Land Rover to produce 6 bespoke cars, which would be delivered as the Bentley Dominator. These cars, which incorporated the underpinnings and drivetrain of the P38, would be specially styled to include bodyshells crafted by Mulliner Parkward of London, incorporating revised light clusters, a more rounded body, and the classic Bentley waterfall grille from the contemporary Bentley Brooklands. At a cost of £3 million each, equivalent to £6.3 million in 2024, the 6 cars were outshopped in yellow, red, blue, grey and black, and were the first ever SUV products of Bentley, and indeed its parent company Rolls-Royce, the former of whom would not create a dedicated SUV model until the Bentley Bentayga of 2015, and the latter the Rolls-Royce Cullinan of 2018. In the end, the Range Rover P38 remained in production until December 13, 2001, 22 days after the official launch of its replacement, the L322, on November 21st, the last edition P38 being exceptionally well equipped, as new features destined for the L322 were implemented on these latter examples. The final P38 to leave the assembly line was a North American spec 4.6 HSE model, driven by former P38A project director John Hall, rounding out 167,259 units and a 7-year production life. The L322, meanwhile, after 5 years of development and backed by BMW money, would become the true Range Rover desired with the P38, its styling being different enough from that of its forebears to give it a true distinction from both the P38 and the Classic, while also incorporating improved mechanics and all the latest luxury features. As before, the autobiography editions and the range-topping Vogue SC model would become the regal carriages of megastars, heads of state, police forces and militaries across the globe, 293,494 examples being produced by the time production ended in 2012. As for the P38, its reputation remains polarizing, as while many can appreciate the car's success in transitioning the Range Rover marque from a comfortable but utilitarian off-roader to a dedicated boulevard cruiser, the numerous reliability problems and issues of its fit and finish drag down its reputation and make it a car to largely avoid on the second-hand market. These unfortunate traits are reflected in the fact that, rather than becoming the face of the Range Rover brand well into the 2000s, it eventually ended up as merely a stopgap between the original Classic and the later L322. Nevertheless, despite it being built on a tight budget and its prospects being cut short when it was found that the only way to rectify its many faults would require essentially a full rebuild, the Range Rover P38 can still be appreciated as the machine that revolutionized the model to become the iconic Chelsea tractor, appealing to drivers from all walks of life and bringing the brand to the mass market. As for P38 survivors today, with their many problems fixed through rebuilds and reworkings of the mechanics, these cars represent a comparatively inexpensive but ultimately luxurious alternative to modern SUVs, a perfect blend of styling and performance that help to maintain Range Rover's place in a class of its own.